Helen Duncan lived in the 20th century and was tried for witchcraft, remembered as the last witch of the United Kingdom. Her story is one of séances, spirits, and claims of raising the dead. Duncan was a spiritualist and medium, one of the most famous showwomen of her time. She shocked audiences in Britain with mysterious séances, where she claimed to draw the spirits of the dead into a strange substance known as ectoplasm. Ectoplasm was described as a supernatural, slimy, cloud-like material that appeared to flow from the mouths, noses, or ears of mediums while in a trance. Some even said it could be seen in the air or touched by hand. But Duncan went further. It was said that the spirits could not only appear, but also speak to their loved ones and even touch them during her sessions. Throughout history, in nearly every religion and mythology, humanity has believed in supernatural powers. Legends and folklore have always fed human imagination and fear. In Europe, witchcraft and sorcery were often seen as evil, works of the devil. By the 1700s, witch hunts swept across the continent, with courts, trials, and brutal executions of those accused. Janet Horne, executed in 1727, was officially the last woman put to death for witchcraft in Britain. But 2 centuries later, in the 20th century, the silence was broken. The witch trials returned in a surprising way, when Helen Duncan herself was accused of witchcraft. Her séances, especially during the First World War, became famous. Families longed to hear from their lost soldiers, and Duncan's supposed ability to call the dead made her a sensation. But when her knowledge of secret wartime events reached beyond what she should have known, the British state grew afraid. Was this woman truly able to contact the dead? A real witch, or was she simply a skilled fraud? Born in Scotland in the year 1897, Helen Duncan was considered strange all her life. From childhood, she was said to display psychic gifts, warning people of dangers before they happened, seeing spirits, and claiming visions of the other side. Her fascination with the supernatural grew stronger with every year, and to many she seemed to carry powers not of this world. At the age of 18, she married a war veteran, Henry Duncan. Together, they had 6 children. Henry encouraged her to pursue and develop her psychic abilities. Helen Duncan came from a family where psychic abilities were said to run in the bloodline. On both sides, women were known for clairvoyance, clairaudience, psychometry, and even foretelling events before they happened. When the young couple began struggling to support their growing family, Helen, encouraged by her husband, started holding experimental séances, attempting to call spirits from the other side. By the 1920s, with the rising popularity of spiritualism, she had found her life's purpose. At first, it began with small predictions, but soon stories spread that Helen could actually see the dead and communicate with them. Invitations poured in from across the country. Sometimes she would host séances in her own home, other times in private houses or spiritualist churches. Grieving families came seeking comfort, desperate to speak once more with their lost loved ones. During these séances, one spirit appeared regularly, Albert Stewart, who was considered her spiritual guide. With Albert's help, Duncan's evening sessions gained a devoted following. Another spirit, Peggy, often accompanied Albert, and they became central to the experience. To modern eyes, the performances might seem strange or unconvincing, but in those years there was a deep hunger for spiritual connection. Her reputation grew stronger throughout the 1920s. The enormous loss of life during the war gave Duncan even more opportunities. Families longed for a final conversation or just one last glimpse of those they had lost. Some witnesses even claimed that at Helen's séances they did not only hear voices, but also saw and touched the spirits themselves. Her stage was set carefully. Attendees were seated in single or double rows around her cabinet, while Duncan sat behind curtains, falling into a trance. With her guides Peggy and Albert and her husband Henry watching from the back of the room, the performance began. At the height of her trance, ectoplasm would flow from her mouth or nostrils in sheets and coils. This strange, ghostly substance was said to shape itself into the forms of the dead. When the curtains opened, the ectoplasm had wrapped itself around the room, forming human-like figures, relatives of the people present, who could speak and sometimes move. No one was allowed to touch these forms or move without her permission. And yet thousands of people came to believe that the dead could return in such a way. For believers, the experience was both shocking and awe-inspiring. To many, her séances were a mixture of faith, mystery, and spectacle, something between a sacred ritual and a magician's performance. One of those who experienced Duncan's séances firsthand was Vincent Woodcock, just one among countless witnesses convinced by her displays. Woodcock was a man who claimed that for 3 years, during 19 separate séances, the spirit of his deceased wife appeared before him. He once described watching Duncan fall into a trance, produce ectoplasm from her mouth, and then seeing that strange substance take the shape of his recently departed wife. Stories like this fascinated countless people, drawing them deeper into her mysterious world. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes and a firm believer in spiritualism, attended her séances. But as Duncan's fame grew, so did the skepticism. Not everyone was convinced that her shows were genuine. In 1928, photographer Harvey Metcalf attended one of her séances. He captured images of Duncan's so-called spirits under the flash of his camera. The photos revealed disturbing details: fake ectoplasm made from cheesecloth, rubber gloves, and even cut-out magazine faces, all presented as if they were spirits of the dead. Just 3 years later, another famous skeptic, ghost hunter Harry Price, investigated her work. A sample of her ectoplasm was examined, and the results were damning. What she produced during séances was nothing more than strips of cloth glued together with egg whites and mixed with chemicals such as iron chloride. Price concluded that Duncan would swallow this material before the séance and later regurgitate it behind the safety of her cabinet curtains. Her career became surrounded by contradictions, testimonies, exposures, and evidence that painted her as a fraud. Yet none of this destroyed her following. Time and again, people insisted that in Duncan's ectoplasmic faces, they recognized their lost relatives and friends. Even as Britain prepared for war once more, people still flocked to her séances. On September 3, 1939, Britain entered the Second World War. Information was tightly controlled to protect military secrets and keep morale strong. But there was a problem. What if mediums like Duncan could accidentally reveal classified details? This fear grew when, on May 24, 1941, Duncan held a séance in Edinburgh. During the session, a spirit reportedly announced shocking news. A British warship had sunk. Roy Firest, head of military intelligence in Scotland, was present. Even with his access to top-level secrets, he had heard nothing about such an event. After the séance, he checked the claim. To his shock, it was true. The HMS Hood, a British battleship, had been lost only days earlier during the Battle of the Denmark Strait. How had this woman learned such secrets before even high-ranking officials knew? By now, Helen Duncan was drawing more and more attention. In November of 1941, during another séance in the city of Portsmouth, she claimed that the spirit of a sailor brought news of yet another naval disaster. According to Duncan, a German submarine had attacked and sunk the British battleship HMS Barham, killing 862 men. The shocking detail was that the sinking of HMS Barham was considered a state secret. The British government would not publicly announce it until January of 1942, yet Duncan claimed she spoke with a drowned sailor named Sid, who told her about the tragedy during her séance. In wartime Britain, where secrecy was vital, this was not taken lightly. Authorities feared that if she could reveal such classified information in public, she might unintentionally pass secrets to enemy spies. With the looming plans of the Normandy invasion, the government decided Duncan was a potential security risk. On January 19, 1944, plainclothes police raided one of her séances and arrested Duncan along with 3 others. At first, she was to be charged under the Vagrancy Act of 1824, a minor law covering fortune-telling and fraud. But the memory of her wartime séances still lingered. So the prosecutors chose instead to revive the ancient Witchcraft Act of 1735. Her trial took place in March at the Old Bailey in London, with the courtroom packed. The proceedings lasted 8 days. Witnesses were called to describe the séances they had attended, the spirits they believed they had seen. In the end, Helen Duncan was sentenced to 9 months in prison. Reports say she collapsed to the floor crying, "I have done nothing wrong. Oh God, is there a God?" As guards led her away, she shouted, "It's all lies!" Thus, Helen Duncan became the last person in Britain to be imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. Her conviction earned her the enduring title of Britain's Last Witch. The trial was widely criticized. Legal associations in both England and Scotland condemned the use of such an archaic law. Even Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself was shocked, calling the use of the Witchcraft Act in a modern court obsolete tomfoolery that wasted judicial resources. Finally, in 1951, the Witchcraft Act was repealed, replaced by the Fraudulent Mediums Act, closing the chapter on witchcraft trials in Britain once and for all. Helen Duncan served only 6 months of her prison sentence before being released on September 22, 1944. At first, she declared she would never hold séances again, but with a devoted circle of loyal followers, she soon returned to the practice. For years, she continued offering private séances. Then, in November of 1956, during another police raid, she was once again arrested. Almost immediately after the raid, Duncan fell ill. Many believe from the shock of being pulled out of a trance. Just 5 weeks later, she died. Doctors listed the cause as diabetes and heart failure. Yet among spiritualists, suspicions grew. Some accused the police of brutality. Others whispered of murder. To her supporters, Helen Duncan became a martyr for the cause of spiritualism, a victim of society's fear and intolerance. To her critics, she remained a fraud who exploited grief. One thing is certain. Had she not revealed sensitive wartime secrets in 1941, she may never have been imprisoned at all. But because she spoke what she was never meant to know, the state treated her not as a fraud, but as a witch. And so Helen Duncan entered history as the last witch of Britain. She divided public opinion for generations. Some swore she truly called the dead. Others saw only deception. Even Winston Churchill, furious that the Witchcraft Act of 1735 had been used in a modern courtroom, condemned the trial as outdated nonsense. This is the story of Helen Duncan, remembered not only as a woman of mystery, but as the final chapter in Britain's long and haunting history of witchcraft. Thank you for spending your time with me on this journey. If you found this story compelling, please support my work by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Until the next case, stay curious and stay safe.